So today I'm on my way to meet with Arzu Merali, a well-known Muslim activist from the Islamic Human Rights Commission. Sam, how are you?
Come in.
That's a nice garden.
Thank you.
I'm coming to meet you today. I thought I know so much about the work that you do at the moment, especially with the IHRC, but I know very little about how Arzu came to be, at this point with the work that you do. So tell me a bit about your background and how you got into this work.
I grew up in sort of white working class North London, student of English literature, but always very political, and I think part of that was really to do with the kind of environment I grew up in North London, or North London, in the 1970s and 80s, which was a bit of a rough time if you were a minority in the UK. It's quite ironic because for a long time, and I think around Europe at least, people look to the UK and think of it as a kind of beacon of multiculturalism, and in a way it is a lot better than many other countries. But as someone who sort of grew up through that very important period of when things kind of got better, I can say things have gotten a lot worse. So for example, when I was young, there were places you wouldn't go to for fear of violence. Even though I grew up in a very kind of white working class area, there was literally a handful of non-English people living there. You did have places which you couldn't go to for fear of being attacked. If you went on a day trip somewhere, I remember going to visit relatives in Brighton when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I was having to actually run away from the beach and go and hide inside a hotel because the NF, the National Front, turned up to have a march, and there was a kind of actual threat to your, physical presence. Things like that have stuck with me, and for a while we thought, okay, we've moved away from that, but as we can see now, unfortunately we've got a resurgence of that type of far-right organisation, probably on a much worse scale. What was activism like then? Was it just individuals doing things, or...? The identity of a politicised identity of being a Muslim didn't really come about till after the Rushdie crisis in around 1989. So, I'm born in 1970. Up until that point, I was sort of part of the black community, and then this identity of Asian had started developing, which was distancing itself from so-called black communities, and suddenly we had a kind of Muslim identity. But I politically woke up, went to bed black and woke up Muslim. Okay, that's literally how it happened. And we saw a kind of fragmentation of any kind of unity or attempt to kind of tackle injustice in a systematic way. And that was partly because the governments at the time were quite clever and were quite good at sort of doing the old British divide and rule.
So where are we going now?
We're going to the office now.
And then you said you've got a meeting? This is the IHRC bookshop.
Absolutely.
And offices back here.
Yeah, this is the hub of operations. Alaikum salam.
Tell me what happens here at the IHRC offices.
Okay, well, there's a lot going on at the IHRC offices. I mean, the area we're standing in now, where a lot of the managers and event officers sit and have their files on their desks, the chairman's office is there. It's all a little bit upside down at the moment because we've just finished Ramadan. We had a massive demonstration that we're part of every year, Al Quds Day. And we're just sort of putting that stuff away. We've got a new exhibition which would be downstairs.
So what are the kind of campaigns that you work on?
There are different types of campaigns that my colleagues work on, for example, to do with some of the laws that are in place, trying to advocate to get them repealed, actually taking legal cases, which is what our advocacy department, we have advocates here who take on cases. We have a solicitor in-house for IHRC Legal who'll deal with employment, discrimination, that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, it's getting busier and busier year on year in terms of this type of work.
And you do a lot of research.
Yes, we look at various issues like hate crime, discrimination, prejudice as a whole. We've been doing a lot of survey work, collecting statistics, and we print them annually regarding different countries. But we also look at things like, for example, the war in Yemen, how that's violating international law.
Where's the anti-war movement standing now here in Britain?
We've had this kind of moment of clarity with the anti-war movement. 1 million people marched over a decade ago against the Iraq war. It didn't stop Parliament voting to go to the war, and even though the appetite in Parliament has now kind of evaporated for going to war, it's not stopping the people at the very top from still launching warlike acts or wars in that region. So on the one hand, you've got an understanding that we don't want to do this, but at the same time, we don't have the power to stop it being done.
Where does that leave somebody who calls them an activist? If they're saying they've done the protests, they've lobbied the government, and yet they see the wars are going to continue, for example, where next? I mean, what does that leave this movement in Britain facing?
Well, these are the crisis questions that we're all kind of trying to face up to and work out ways of moving forward. I think personally and organisationally we've seen, or we feel, that there isn't so much point of engaging anymore with state institutions, because ultimately it's a disproportionate power relationship. We don't have power, we literally have to beg, and we are not listened to. And so it becomes an exercise in humiliation. You will just kind of try and compromise to get a small concession, when really what we're aiming for are the big things like no war, end of prejudice, end of structural inequality. So for people like ourselves, we're looking at trying to really go back to building long-term alliances, not just within the UK, but in different parts of the world.
So that was the IHRC bookshop. And you know, sitting down talking with Arzu, I was thinking how important it actually is to have voices like hers. Sure, it's not the loud, flamboyant, extrovert character of activism you sometimes see, but it's measured, it's the voice of reason. Here's somebody who's been an activist for a long time and has seen this country change, the positive trajectory and the negative, and she has something to say about it, an assessment that she's made. And I think it was particularly worrying for that reason to hear her say that organisations like the IHRC, they've been there, they've done that, they've tried to get policymakers and the government to listen, and they simply feel that they don't. And I think that's a particularly concerning indication about the state of Britain today.